Sylvie at one point asked Loki during the Loki miniseries, what makes a Loki? And they have a great debate back and forth, whether it's just their nature, do they lose it? Is it because they always find a way to keep going and keep trying? I personally think that's more of what makes a Loki, and that's why I'm so excited to see so many costumers like myself going and making a Loki variant in whatever format they feel like doing. My own version of Loki is going to be set in 1530s, 1520s Florence at one of the heights of the Medici power. And that's because there's no one quite as Machiavellian as Loki in the Marvel universe. To do that for someone with my gender, I'm going to want a Balzo. It is a specialty hat that is sort of a carryover from the previous century, and I'm making mine with this grape wreath that I'm just going to start wrapping in layers of fabric. The first layer is a scrap of green linen I had left over from a bodice, and we'll just keep going through all the other layers as we find them, right? I started to figure out pretty quick that my remnants weren't going to be long enough to wrap the entire wreath in a single go, so I'm just stitching some of them in place with really big basting stitches. This is literally never going to be seen and covered with other layers of fabric, so it seemed just as easy to get it done quickly and just kind of tack the edges of my wrapping in place. One of the more unexpected challenges I ran into during this phase of the project was trying to sew around the grapevines that are inside the wreath. On the one hand, it helped me anchor the fabric really well to that so I could have a stable foundation. On the other hand, I kept having to weave my needle around things on an invisible backside that I couldn't really understand where the vines were. Just something to keep in mind if you're going on one of these little adventures with me. Okay, so I swear I'm not in an interrogation. I just flipped the task light I'm working with back on me for a minute. So Balzos. The whole point of Balzos in the early 16th century is to take up space. A Balzo are these sort of sausage roll looking hats that were popular for, I don't know, I'd say about 20 years in the early 16th century on the Italian peninsula. And it's sort of a holdover and a transition between some of the 15th century headwear and into the more elaborate braids and veil structures you see in the later 16th century. It's just kind of a weird style. And since, let's face it, who is more Machiavellian than Loki in the Marvel Universe, especially in the early Marvel Universe, from like back in the days of yore, it feels like. I kind of feel like Loki should be from Florence and all of that sort of shenanigans that comes with the Medici and such. I'm trying to decide how I want to do this Balzo, because there's a couple different versions. As you get into the 1530s, they start to get smaller. They kind of take on more of a snood-like situation that could just be supported by braids. I want Loki's Balzo to be giant, which is why you've been watching me cover a grapevine wreath to give me the right silhouette that I'm looking for. But that's not blingy enough. I mean, the linen is great for keeping the grapevine together. It kind of grips to my hair all right. But these things were amazing. When I was at the Medici exhibit, in addition to just seeing the Pisa dress, which was amazing, there was a whole exhibition of paintings and portraits. And I got to take some really close-up details, but you would see gold work and there was incredible pleating and detail. So I think I need to cover the linen. I appreciate that it's there. It will give me a sturdy base, but I need more because Loki is extra. This is my thought process. So I am debating on different ways to make this extra. So why don't I take you along with me and we'll make some design choices, no? Okay. All right, thank you for humoring me in my literal cave that I film and work in. Okay, so base layer, it's getting kind of washed out on my camera here, so I will see about doing some color correction in post. But this is Silk Noel. If you're not familiar with Silk Noel, it is silk fibers, but it's not super nice. It's kind of slubby a little bit, which gives it some grip. So I'm thinking this will be great to put over my wreath and make that as a base to protect whatever I put on top of it as a fancy fabric. Let's zoom out a bit. There we go. So from what I'm seeing online, there's a couple examples where you see them from behind. And in one, it looks like it's just the sausage roll. In others, it looks like it's been fully covered and it almost takes on sort of that hairnet snood shenanigans that we saw with my hairnet video from last summer. I think I like this version better because this means if I decide to go nuts and color my hair or do something weird, it's not going to be quite as apparent for the costume, because I would also like to wear this as a historical piece when I'm at historical events, right? Fun times. So that's my base. I'm actually really excited about how well this stuff grips onto my hair when I have it braided up though. So with that as a base, there's a couple other things to look at. Let's put you back down. Okay, so option one, you might remember this from the New York Fabric District Hall. This is a silk metal net that I picked up at one of the stores out there, and it gives the gold work crazy embellishment that they have, which is kind of awesome all on its own, right? It would mean I would have far less trimming work to do because the fabric is doing a lot of that heavy lifting for the details. I might just make a little piece of jewelry or something to wear at the base of this, where I can stick some horns, make jewelry, that sort of thing. But I really like this effect. But I also have another effect. Okay, so this is a silk scarf that I picked up, which is voided velvet. So it was a period practice to have a voided velvet sort of like this and then back it with a more sturdy fabric, not unlike that obnoxious mustard yellow. This looks really subdued. I think it would be more subtle, but I don't know. given that my dress is going to be a dark green velvet, I think it's either the dark green velvet or the olive green silk. I feel like this one is more in keeping with the examples from the books and all of that. This is cool, and I'll save this idea, but it might be something that I do for another portion of the project. So we'll come back to this. Congratulations. I didn't actually need to do an opinion poll. I figured it out. I just had to talk at my camera, because once you've been doing this for 2 years, what I've learned is you're no longer afraid of talking to the camera or at the camera while you look at fabric. It just kind of becomes natural, and you become my talking buddy. So thanks for helping me design my Balzo. Let's start getting this cut out in a circle, because I think what we're going to do is make a giant bag and then tack and wrap that into the inside and make this a really easy construction. Okay, so you want to know why everybody makes circle skirts? It's because the geometry is really obnoxiously easy. All you need to do is put a string from your center to the radius of the circle you're drawing. I'm going to stick a pin right there for the purposes of what I'm doing, and wrap this around a few times so that it stays in place. So that's going to give you a focal point. And you're going to take that string and use it to make even marks all the way around. If my fabric wasn't so grippy, I would probably just run with this on a chalk wheel, but it's kind of grippy. There we go. And that, my dears, is why everybody does circle skirts. The geometry is just obnoxiously easy. Other thing you might want to be aware of when you're cutting multiple layers like this, pin them together so that they don't shift on you. Otherwise, you're going to have a shifty, uneven mess that you have to even up later. And no one wants to do that. Okay, there. Fold this in on itself just a little bit, and I have just a tiny bit to even up on my edges. There we go. I know, it looks massive, but trust me, once we get seam allowance put in here and wrap it around the grape wreath, it's gonna be the right size. I actually measured this before I got started doing it to make sure I didn't make it too small. I can always pull more into the inside of the Balzo and tack that down. I can't really add stuff back. So Next up, we're going to take this, lay it over that silk metallic net, and cut out a second giant circle, and then bag line the whole thing together. For the record, with this portion of my project, I have regrets. Kind of some serious regrets. I wish I had used an older, less awesome pair of shears to cut through this metallic shear, because the metallic threads ended up causing some bluntness and sort of issues like that with my shears. I'm gonna have to go in and get them sharpened and just kind of oiled a bit. So if you've got something like this where it's an actual metal shear like this, please go and grab some old crappy scissors before you start cutting. By the way, if these sewing tutorials and videos are helpful, I would love to hear about it. Go ahead and click that like button and maybe comment down below about what your next project's going to be. Bright side to using my lining as the pattern for my top fabric is that I can just take all the pins that were holding the two layers together and start sewing the bag lining in place. It actually didn't take that much time, but the metallic shear again on this one is being a pain, honestly. It's kind of shifting around, so I had to adjust it in a few spots. I had to trim it back where it had come out a little bit too far when I was done sewing it all together. So just keep in mind, use lots of pins. Probably not unlike velvet if you're used to sewing velvet. And this is your friendly reminder to leave yourself a gap, maybe slightly larger than the one I left for myself. That way you can turn everything right sides out after you clip everything. Again, with circular items, if you're doing linings, it's really helpful to clip the edges. That way it will stretch and curve around that curved seam that you just put in. It may not have actually made that much of a difference in this particular project, but I did it all the same out of good habit. Yeah, seeing my struggle? This is why I would highly recommend leave yourself a little bit more room to try and turn everything out. It did ultimately work all right, but I was getting concerned about doing damage to the metal threads going back and forth as much as I was. In an effort to make it pleat evenly all the way around the circle, at least as evenly as I could with an organic base like these grapevines, I started by pinning my 4/4 as close as I could, and then pleating everything down in between those quarters with some knife pleats. It took a little bit of time in doing to try and pin around the grapevine structure again, but I do feel like it was worth it. That way my pins didn't move around while I was trying to sew down knife pleats. I know I've complained a lot about working with this metallic shear and how it's kind of scratchy and messed up my scissors, but at the same time, I'm also not having to go through and do a lot of gold work embroidery to get the effect I'm going for. So in that regard, it's saving me a lot of time, and I do really appreciate it. I'm not gonna lie, these grapevines have also bent a lot of my pins while I'm trying to pin all of these knife pleats down. As far as spacing goes, I'm just kind of wrapping it over my fingers because they don't need to be little, and honestly, tiny pleats with this metallic are probably going to start snapping threads. So I want to keep them fairly large and generous. And the silk wall underneath is actually helping to pad them and protect the metallic shear threads. With all of the knife pleats in place and pinned, it's time to start whip stitching the outside fabric to the green linen foundations. I tried not to go around the grapevines inside as much as possible because that green linen should be anchored pretty well to it by now. And I was getting kind of sick of fighting with the grapevines, I'm not gonna lie. What do you think it takes to make a Loki? For me, it's gonna have to start with an awesome hat. This fits wonderfully over a set of crossed braids, or in my case, a bun, where I just kind of plop it on the back and balance it on the top of my head. The silk wall makes it sit pretty securely. I wouldn't take it out in a big breeze though. What do you think? Capable of going to Asgard and traveling through time and space with everybody else at the time agencies? Let me know down in the comments, and be sure to check out everybody else that's also making a Loki cosplay. I think we're going to have a lot of fun seeing everybody's different variations. One of the things I just couldn't get over as I was wearing this Balzo for the first time was how much it looked like the Medici portraits I saw in New York. The pleating, it's got the right balance and proportion for the 1520s. It's just perfect for what I am going for. Do you feel like making a Balzo yourself? In the meantime, beautiful humans, please take care of yourselves and go take a look at what other projects people are working on. There's a big old world out there.